Her. Everyone believes they can be a hero. We dream of heroic deeds inspired by stories from books and movies. Running into a burning building to save an animal? Easy. Donating a kidney to a friend? No problem. Getting in the way of a gunman? No problem. But the truth is, we don't know what we're going to do until we're faced with real danger. Can you look your fear in the face and say, "Take me, kill me"? When the moment comes, will you choose your life or someone else's? I stared at the magazine in the hospital waiting room without thinking. The cover showed a handsome man leaving a club surrounded by models, his smile reflecting the flashes of the cameras. His hair was slightly hidden by piercing blue eyes. "Daniel in action," the caption read. The scene seemed alien in the sterile hospital setting, as if it were taking place on another planet. "Selina," the nurse called softly. "He's ready to see you." I sat up too quickly, and the room spun before my eyes. I was on the verge of exhaustion. I hadn't slept in over 30 hours. How can you sleep when your father almost died? Inside the room, he lay unconscious on a hospital bed. His body was covered in tubes and wires, his face almost invisible behind an oxygen mask. The room looked eerily sterile. I squeezed his cold hand, feeling my heart squeeze in pain. Tears rolled down my cheeks again, and I wiped them away for the 1,000th time. He was the rock of my life, the man who always held our family together. At that moment, my older brother Mark appeared in the doorway. I ran to him and hugged him. "What did the doctor say?" I asked, trying not to panic. Mark glanced over his shoulder at my father. "We'll talk in the hallway." Nodding, I walked up to Dad and kissed him softly on the forehead before walking out into the hallway with my brother. In the harsh light of the hospital hallway, I looked closely at Mark. His disheveled hair and tired eyes told me he'd had a rough day. "Selina," he began, squeezing my hand tightly. "I need you to be strong. This news, it's hard." I nodded, trying to prepare myself for the worst. "Dad had a stroke," Mark said, fighting back tears. "We don't know how badly it's affected him yet." "What can we do?" My voice shook with helplessness. "Now we have no choice but to wait," my other brother Alex said, appearing behind me. He came over and hugged me tightly. "The doctors are still checking him out." My brothers exchanged worried glances, and I realized they weren't telling me everything. "What are you hiding?" I demanded. Mark just shook his head. "You have an interview soon, remember?" he said. "Go home and try to get some sleep. We'll call you as soon as we learn anything new." I nodded reluctantly. I didn't want to leave, but I knew they were right. I needed to rest to study for the upcoming test. After saying goodbye, I walked outside. The cold air and the distant lights of Manhattan suddenly seemed alien and distant to me. I felt helpless. Was there nothing I could do? As I walked back to the car, I looked up at the night sky, too light from the city lights to see the stars. The faces of the people in the magazine flashed before my mind's eye, their carefree smiles. I wish I were in their shoes, so I wouldn't have to worry about things like that. Closing my eyes, I thought of the stars hidden behind the city lights. Help me. Him. I pushed aside the silk pillows and reached for a glass of champagne, admiring the view of Manhattan in the evening through the window of a private jet. The skyscrapers sparkled like jewels, but the city of glitz and noise had never been my favorite place. I always felt like an outsider in this metropolis that seemed to feed on the energy of its inhabitants. My return here was due to only one thing: necessity. My gaze slid over the bright lights, peering into the many lights of the hospitals scattered around the city. One of them was currently my bane, since it was there, in a hospital bed, that my father lay. The model next to me seemed to think otherwise. She groaned softly as I ran my hand down her back, clearly trying to get my attention, but my mind was elsewhere. Money and power had always attracted people, and she was no exception. But now it all seemed so empty to me. "I'm here," she whispered. "Why don't we take advantage of the time we have left?" I watched silently as she fiddled with the clasp on my belt, hoping that the turbulence would quickly put an end to her efforts. Luckily, the pilot had warned us of the coming jolts, and I used that as an excuse to break away. I knew I'd send her away soon. I'd tired of this game before the flight even began. But while I was thinking about unnecessary romance, I came back to reality, to my obligations to the company, to the meeting I had to attend, and most importantly, to my father. Bradley Clark, my father, was someone I'd always been proud of. A man who built an empire from scratch, created a billion-dollar business, and became one of the most powerful people in the world. But he was also my harshest critic, and his expectations were always outrageous. Publicly offensive behavior? He said, wearily bringing a hand to his face. I expected more. I shrugged, looking out at the blooming Central Park where we met the day after my arrival. I tried to suppress the feeling of guilt, to distance myself from his disappointment. You need to learn to control your actions. His voice was cold, but I knew that behind that coldness, there was deep disappointment. You always expected too much, I replied, hiding the pain behind sarcasm. Maybe you just asked too much of me? He looked at me, and I saw the pain in his eyes. He had changed since my mother died, but so had I. Danny, I need your help. His voice softened, and I felt the guilt rising inside me. I couldn't refuse him, no matter how much I tried to be independent. But before I could answer, I was interrupted by an unexpected blow. I suddenly bumped into someone, and white petals fell from his hands. I looked up and froze, the words caught in my throat. In front of me stood the most beautiful person I had ever seen. Her. I nearly tripped, but strong arms caught me before I could fall. I looked up at the man who had stopped me from falling to the ground. He stood up straight, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap and large aviator sunglasses. Sorry, I mumbled, stepping back, my cheeks flushed slightly. His scent was intoxicating, rich and masculine. Are you okay? Okay, he replied, his voice deep and husky. He bent down to pick up the flowers I had dropped, handing them to me carefully. You dropped them. Thank you, I said, taking the bouquet from his hands. There was something oddly familiar about it. I tilted my head, studying his features as much as his disguise would allow. Do I know you? You seem familiar. You're wrong, he replied shortly, his tone ending the conversation. He glanced around the park briefly, then turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the tree-lined path. I frowned, puzzled by the encounter, but eventually shrugged. My thoughts were too jumbled to focus on the mysterious stranger. I continued walking through Central Park, the weight of my father's condition weighing on me. The bouquet of lilies in my hands brought me no comfort, though their scent was soothing. My father's situation loomed in my thoughts, tormenting my peace. As I approached a quiet corner of the park, I noticed an older man sitting alone on a bench. His eyes closed, as if he were deep in thought. There was something about his posture that drew me closer, something sad and fragile. Excuse me? I asked quietly. He opened his eyes, blinking as if waking from sleep. His eyes met mine, and there was a deep sadness on his face. Can I help you? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted to see if you were okay, I said. You seemed upset. He stirred slightly, nodding toward a small plaque etched into the bench. Just remembering someone important, he said, his voice thick with grief, trying to figure out how to move on. I leaned over to read the inscription. It was dedicated to a woman named Isabel. My heart clenched with sympathy. Without thinking, I handed him the bouquet of lilies, smiling slightly. For Isabel, I said quietly. His hand shook as he reached out to accept the flowers. Thank you, he whispered, tears gathering in his eyes. Can I ask your name? Selina, I replied, pausing for a moment before sitting down next to him. Is there anything else I can do? You've done so much already, he said, his voice full of gratitude. He seemed to have made some kind of decision, and a gentle smile touched his lips. But perhaps there's more. What is it? I asked, curious and wanting to help in any way I could. He looked past me, down the path where the man I'd encountered earlier had disappeared. There's someone I'd like you to meet, he said. Someone who needs help, even if they don't know it yet. I followed his gaze, puzzled. He wanted me to meet the man I'd met earlier? I don't mind, but My phone vibrated in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. It was a text from my brother. Mark, Selina, come quickly. Mark, it's Dad. Panic was setting in, and I was having trouble breathing. I'm so sorry, but I have to go, I said, standing up. This is an emergency. The man nodded, concern in his eyes. I hope everything is okay. We'll see each other again, Selina. I'm sure of it. With a quick wave, I raced away, my heart pounding as I hurried toward the hospital. Little did I know that this brief encounter in Central Park would set the stage for something that would change my life forever. "We were able to revive your father," the doctor said, his voice laced with a seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. "Stroke victims are at higher risk for heart attacks within the first 24 hours. We are monitoring his condition closely and running more tests to determine the best course of action." It was clear from the way he spoke that he didn't hold out much hope. "Thank you, doctor," Alex said, his voice even through the fear I knew he must be feeling. The doctor nodded briefly and left us standing there, the weight of his words weighing on us. "How long will Dad need to stay here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't imagine him recovering enough to come home anytime soon. "We may not get that chance," Mark said grimly. "What do you mean?" I asked, fear churning in my stomach. My brothers exchanged glances that only increased my anxiety. Finally, Alex turned to me, his expression pained. "We can't let him stay here." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his expression tense. "We're broke, Selina." I shook my head, trying to process his words. "What? The restaurant?" "The restaurant has been struggling for years," Alex admitted, his voice thick with defeat. "The recession hit us hard. Dad took out a second mortgage on the house to keep it afloat." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling a wave of guilt. I was so focused on my own life that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. "I have an interview coming up. Maybe if I get the job," but Mark was already shaking his head. "The hospital bills are mounting. Even with insurance, we're drowning." I couldn't stay there any longer. The hospital walls felt like they were closing in on me, the weight of reality pressing so hard I could barely breathe. I pushed past my brothers, my legs shaking as I stumbled through the hallways and down the stairs until I finally broke out into the cool night air. I stood outside the hospital, looking up at the dark sky. The city lights were too bright to see the stars, leaving the sky a blank, empty canvas. Even the planes I'd once dreamed of flying were nowhere to be seen. I was a fool to ever believe in such things. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my pounding heart. I had to focus. I had to succeed in this interview. This was my only chance to help my family, to keep my father in the hospital where he could get the care he needed. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to sit up straight. I had no choice but to succeed. For your father, for your brothers, for all of us. Him. I stared at my father, disbelief and anger swirling inside me like a storm. I couldn't believe what he was suggesting. My own father, the man who had built an empire from scratch, was seriously talking about arranging a marriage for me. Not just a relationship, but a marriage. "Someone you met in the park?" I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, this isn't the 19th century. You can't just—" "I'm not saying you have to marry her tomorrow," he interrupted, his voice quiet, too quiet. "But you need someone, Danny. Someone who can ground you, give you a purpose beyond yourself. And yes, someone who can help you clean up your public image." "So it's all about looks," I countered, clenching my fists. "You're willing to throw me into a marriage just to save face?" "It's more than that, and you know it," he said sharply. "This is about your future, the future of this company. Do you think you can keep this up? Scandal after scandal? The board is losing faith in you. They need to see that you can take responsibility. Be committed." I turned away, unable to bear the intensity in his eyes. He wasn't wrong, and that was the worst part. I'd been going downhill for years since... No, I couldn't think about it. I wouldn't. But marriage? To some girl who handed out flowers in Central Park? That was absurd. "I don't even know her," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "Then get to know her," Dad said, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. "She seems like a good person, someone who cares about others. Maybe she's just what you need." "What if she's not?" I challenged, crossing my arms over my chest. "What if she's just another person letting me down?" Daddy's expression softened, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. "You won't know until you try, Denny. There are no guarantees in life. But I know this. You can't keep living the way you've been living. You need to find something, someone to hold on to." I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. It was all happening too fast. The conversation was spinning out of control. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to settle down, to take on the responsibility my father had talked about. But as much as I hated to admit it, he was right. My life had become a series of empty, meaningless moments, one after another. Maybe I really did need something, or someone, to change that. Okay, I finally said, bitterness in my mouth. I'll meet her, but I'm not promising anything, Dad. That's all I ask, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Just give me a chance, son. I turned away, looking at the rows of headstones. The cemetery was quiet, silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was chirping. I didn't know what the future held for me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Her. Bradley Clark. Warm smile didn't waver as I answered him. His eyes sparkled with a mixture of relief and something else I couldn't quite place. He took my hand in both of his, holding it gently but firmly, as if sealing our agreement. Thank you, Selina, he said quietly. You have no idea how much this means to me, and to Daniel, though he doesn't realize it yet. I nodded, my mind still spinning. The reality of what I'd just agreed to was slowly sinking in, and with it came a wave of doubt and fear. But then I thought of my father, lying in a hospital bed, and I knew I couldn't back out now. When will I meet him? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Soon, Brad promised. We'll take it one step at a time. I'll arrange the meeting. In the meantime, I'll make sure your father gets the best care possible. You have nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him, to believe that he had everything under control. But the pit in my stomach only deepened as I realized the commitment I'd just made. To marry a man I didn't love, didn't even know, just to save my father. It felt like something out of a twisted fairy tale. I have to go, I said sharply, wrenching my arm from his grip. I need to see my father. Sure, Brad said, stepping back. Take as long as you need to. And Selina, thank you again. I won't let you down. I nodded, barely hearing him as I turned and hurried back into the hospital. The wind picked up, blowing my hair around my face as I pushed through the doors and into the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breathing ragged. What had I done? I found my way to my father's room, my legs moving automatically. As I entered, the sight of him lying there, so pale and frail, brought tears to my eyes. I walked over to his bed and gently took his hand, trying to push away all my doubts. Hi, Dad, I whispered. I'm here. He stirred slightly, his eyes flickering. A small smile played on his lips when he saw me. Selina, he murmured weakly. You don't have to worry so much, honey. I can't help it, I said, forcing a smile. I just want you to feel better. He squeezed my hand, his grip barely noticeable. I'll do it, he said. I promise. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed him, but I had to hold on to that hope, for his sake, if not my own. But I have good news, I said, trying to keep my tone light. We can keep you here as long as you need us. Someone is helping us. Dad frowned slightly. Who? Just someone who wants to help, I said, not ready to explain. Don't worry about it, okay? Just focus on getting better. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. I could tell he wanted to ask more, but he was too tired to press the issue. Okay, he finally said, closing his eyes again. Thank you, Selina. I don't know what I'd do without you. I swallowed hard, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. You don't have to worry about it, Dad. I will always be here for you. As I sat there, holding his hand, I knew I had made the right decision. No matter how terrifying the future seemed, I had to do it. For my father, for my family. But as I sat there, in that quiet hospital room, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I had never imagined. Over the next few days, Selina tried to focus on her father's recovery. But the agreement she had made with Brad Knight was constantly on her mind. She couldn't shake the anxiety growing inside her. What kind of man was Daniel? Would he support his father's plan? Would he even want to marry her? Selina couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be married to someone like Daniel. She had seen his face in tabloids and magazines, often accompanied by scandalous headlines. He was handsome, no doubt about it, with piercing blue eyes and a confident smile that could melt hearts. But he was also known for his wild behavior, playboy lifestyle, and obvious disdain for responsibility. Was this the man she was supposed to marry? She tried to push the thoughts away by spending time with her father, but they kept coming back. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined what it would be like to stand next to Daniel, to be his wife in front of the whole world. And every time, her heart pounded with fear and excitement. Finally, the day came when she was to meet Daniel properly. Brad had arranged for them to have dinner together at an expensive restaurant in the city. Selina spent hours getting ready, trying to look her best, but no amount of makeup or carefully styled hair could calm her nerves. When she arrived at the restaurant, she felt like she had entered a lion's den. Daniel was already there, sitting at a table in the back. He was dressed impeccably, his dark hair slicked back, and his pointed chin was accentuated by a light stubble. When he saw her, his expression was unreadable, but he stood politely, motioning for her to sit. "Selina," he said in a calm but distant voice, "I'm glad you could come." She forced a smile as she sat down across from him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with his piercing blue eyes. "So my father told me about his little proposal, and you agreed to it. Why?" Selina took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Because I had no other choice. My father is in the hospital, and I can't afford his medical bills. Your father offered to help, and I couldn't say no." Daniel's lips curled into a small smirk. "So you do this out of necessity, not love." Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she held his gaze. "I don't know you, Daniel. How can I love you?" "Fair enough," he said, nodding. "But you should know something about me, Selina. I'm not the kind of person who believes in love. I'm not into relationships, and I'm definitely not into marriage." Selina felt a twinge of disappointment, though she wasn't sure why. "Then why are you agreeing to this?" "Because my father is right about one thing. I need to clean up my image, and marrying a sweet, innocent girl like you might just do the trick." She frowned at his words. "I'm not some pawn in your PR game, Daniel." "No, I'm not," he said, his tone softening slightly. "But if we're going to do this, we need to be clear about what we're getting into. This isn't going to be some fairy tale romance, Selina. This is a business deal, pure and simple." Selina's heart sank at his words, but she knew he was being honest. This wasn't a love story, it was a deal. But she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Daniel's cold exterior than he was letting on. Was there a chance this could develop into something more? "Okay," she said, lifting her chin. "But if we're going to do this, I have my terms." Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Oh, tell me." "I want to get to know you," she said firmly. "If we're going to get married, even if it's just for show, I want to at least get to know the man I'm marrying." A ghost of a smile played on Daniel's lips. "You're more interesting than I expected, Selina. Very well, we'll get to know each other, but don't expect too much from me." Selina nodded, feeling an odd sense of determination. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to make the best of it. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, there was more to Daniel than met the eye. As the days turned into weeks, Selina and Daniel found themselves navigating the strange, new territory of their arrangement. What had started out as a simple business deal had slowly escalated into something more complex. Daniel, true to his word, kept a certain distance. He was polite and respectful, but there was always a barrier between them. He kept his emotions under lock and key, allowing glimpses of his true self to emerge only in fleeting moments of vulnerability. Selina could see the burden he carried, the expectations, pressure, and loneliness that came with his lifestyle. It was in these moments that she began to see beyond the wild playboy image he projected onto the world. Selina, on the other hand, remained kind and genuine. She treated Daniel not as a billionaire or a celebrity, but as an individual, a human being with flaws, dreams, and fears. She didn't push him away, but she didn't let him push her away either. Slowly, she found herself caring for him in ways she hadn't expected. It was confusing, even scary, but she couldn't deny that something was growing between them. Their public appearances together were carefully planned. They attended galas, charity events, and even landed on a few magazine covers. The world watched as they became it couple, the perfect couple. But behind the scenes, their relationship was anything but perfect. It was a delicate dance of closeness and distance, unspoken words and languid glances. One evening, after a particularly grueling charity event, Selina and Daniel found themselves alone in his penthouse. The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the soft hum of the city below filled the silence between them. Selina changed out of her dress for something more comfortable, while Daniel poured them both a glass of wine. "Do you ever regret this?" Selina asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Agree to all of this?" Daniel looked at her, surprised by the question. He sipped his wine, considering his answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "There are days when I wonder what the hell I'm doing. But then..." He hesitated, meeting her gaze. "But there are times when it's not so bad." Selina felt her heart flutter at his words. She knew he wasn't very good at expressing his feelings, and now he was closer to vulnerability than ever before. "I'm glad," she said quietly, "because I don't regret it either." Daniel set his glass down, his gaze intense. "Selina, this isn't what I expected. You aren't what I expected." She smiled sadly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean," he said, his voice low, "that you're different. You make me want things I've never wanted before, and it scares the hell out of me." Selina's breath caught in her throat. "Daniel." He stood up, moving closer to her. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be who you deserve." Selina reached out, taking his hand. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself," she said. "That's all I want." For a moment, they just stood there, oblivious to the outside world. It was just the two of them, their hearts beating in unison, the air thick with unspoken emotion. Then, slowly, Daniel leaned in, his lips brushing hers. The kiss was hesitant at first, as if they were both afraid to cross the invisible line that had separated them for so long. But as the kiss deepened, all the walls they had built up around themselves began to crumble. When they finally pulled away, breathless and a little dazed, Daniel pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't want this to be just a business deal anymore," he whispered. "I want more." Selina's heart soared. "Then let's make it more," she said, her voice full of hope. "Let's see where this takes us." From that moment on, everything changed. They weren't just putting on a show anymore. They were building something real. They spent more time together, not just as a couple in public, but as two people who were genuinely falling in love. Daniel opened up more, letting Selina see the man behind the mask, and Selina found herself falling deeper in love with him. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. They had their fights and misunderstandings, but each time they came back stronger, more determined to make it work. They learned to trust each other, to lean on each other, and to build a life together that wasn't based on obligation, but on love. Months later, as they stood together in front of their family and friends, exchanging vows, Selina couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. What had started as a desperate bargain had turned into something beautiful, something neither of them expected, but both of them were grateful for. As Daniel placed the ring on her finger, he smiled at her with a warmth and sincerity that took her breath away. "I love you, Selina," he said, his voice smooth and full of emotion. "And I promise to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Tears welled up in Selina's eyes as she repeated the words to him. "I love you too, Daniel, forever." And as they kissed, sealing their vows, they knew that this was only the beginning of their journey together. A journey built on love, trust, and the belief that even the most unexpected circumstances can lead to the happiest of endings.